great to be with you guys today. It's always nice to speak about mob programming. Just to kind of give you context of what I'm going through, I'm going to focus on some of the things we've learned from mob programming, just to get an idea of the audience. Is everyone here a developer or anybody not involved directly in dev?
Not a developer, but
not developer. So what is your?
The reason I'm here is the title "Get the Best of Everyone."
Okay, awesome.
So you're the everyone else.
Yeah.
So I'm going to focus on development because we're largely developers, but I hope you get value as well.
Yeah.
And give me a shout at the end. I'd love to know like if you did or if it was a waste of time or where it comes through. So I want to start off by sharing an experience I had 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was traveling to the US to speak at a regional conference. And one of the things I like to do when I travel is a thing I call team tourism. And the idea of team tourism is that there are teams all over the world that are doing amazing things. And if you just spend a day or so with them, you can learn things that you take back to your team that have a dramatic impact on how you work. And so in this particular experience, hello Ricky.
Ricky, what are you doing?
Are we still good to go?
Yeah, I was hoping to begin today.
Does anybody know how to work this equipment?
I have no idea.
No.
Is it a computer?
Where's Ross? Where's Ricky?
Well, I'm sure somebody will figure it out. I'll keep going. If it stays like this for too long,
You can say it's in the, oh, that's the.
then you just need to imagine in your mind is what it's saying. So on this particular trip, I'd set up a day with a company called Pluralsight. I don't know if you guys have heard of Pluralsight before. Yeah, they do the online training, so most people have. The thing with Pluralsight is they have a very strong focus on software craftsmanship. And my expectation on the day was that I was going to spend a day pairing up with a dev, and that we'd be coding the whole day and everything would be awesome. And when I arrived there, I was quite surprised to find that the team that I was allocated with told me that they didn't do pair programming. They did this thing called mob programming. And at that time, I had no clue what mob programming meant. But by the end of that day, I hadn't just learned a really unique way of tackling work. I'd also found a really enjoyable way of learning and growing as a software developer. And so today I'm going to share some of those experiences and what we've learned in the last year or two by applying mob programming in our team. So just by way of introduction, my name is Mark Prohl. I'm a dev lead for MYB based in Auckland. In MYB, my team looks after a thing they call the Practice Online system. And if you find some of the experiences I'm sharing today interesting, I put a lot of these on my blog or share them on Twitter, and I'd love to engage with you guys on those two platforms to learn more. So I'm going to frame today's session with a quote from a well-known author and organization behaviorist called Peter Block. And Peter says the value of another's experience is to give us hope, not to tell us how or whether to proceed. So I'm not here to tell you that you must do mob programming, or even that the way that we do mob programming is the only way to do it. But what I am here to do is, if you're interested in trying this out, to give you a bit of hope that it is possible and that there are teams that are doing this. And kind of in that vein, I've taken a lot of the experiences that we've had over the last year or so and put them together in a guide for teams getting started with mob programming, which you can buy for a couple bucks on Leanpub. So I make a fortune out of this. This is my alternative revenue stream. But really, this is a work in progress, so there's still a lot to do. And I did it in the hopes that teams that are trying to try these practices won't repeat the same mistakes that we made and get up and running a lot quicker. So with that, what I'm going to go through is I'm going to outline what mob programming is, go through the mechanics and the role of it, and then really tackle some of the common questions and challenges that you face when you do it. Just a quick question. Have any of you guys experimented with mob programming before? Okay, so one person.
I ran a little coding dojo here for a few hours last year.
Oh, awesome. So I would love to find out how that experience went and the benefits and pros and cons that you saw, and if your approach was similar to the one that we took. So with that, what is mob programming? Well, at a very fundamental level, mob programming is when 3 or more developers get together, working on a single problem with a single computer. That's it at its essence. And it sounds really simple, but when you get into the dynamics of making that happen, it can have a few challenges involved in it. So while mob programming may sound like a radical idea, there are teams all over the world that are seeing value with mob programming. Not just in the US, a lot of Europe, people are trying this out and saying that they're getting success with it. And even where I'm from originally, which is South Africa, I know of a couple teams there that are seeing value from it. So it's not as radical as you may think it is.
Who's the team in Australia?
So I wish I knew who they were. What I did was I went to Google and I typed mob programming, and then every picture I found, I read the blog post. So if anybody knows who that is, I would love to know. Apparently they were experimenting with mob programming. I think they're based in Sydney, but I could be wrong. The team in New Zealand, that's my team that I'm currently in. So we have a lot of fun with this. Just do you guys do pairing as well, or is that a practice that some of you guys use, or do any of you use that?
Very ad hoc.
Very ad hoc. Okay.
We do it at times.
Okay. So the reason I ask that is mob programming is really an evolutionary step forward from pair programming. So in pair programming, you have this concept of a driver and a navigator. The driver is the person kind of churning out the code. The navigator is observing and giving directions and looking for the bigger picture of, okay, here, have you considered X, Y, and Z, and just looking from there. And while that metaphor works well for pair programming, it falls apart for me when you go into mob programming. Firstly, it just seems like a really bad idea to have more than one navigator. That feels bad. And so, in the mob that I work in, we change the names of the roles from driver and navigator to typist and rest of the mob. And if we look at what the typist is doing, I think it boils down to 3 things. It's first listening to what the rest of the mob is asking them to do, then being able to translate that into code, and then finally being able to work for short periods of time without a complete understanding. So listening to a group of people asking what you, telling you what to do can sometimes prove to be a challenge. And when you're the typist and you're getting conflicting requests from the mob, you need to remain calm, take a deep breath, and help get them to a point where they have direction. So that's the first thing as a typist that's really important. The next thing that kind of falls in line with this is translating what people are asking you to do to code. And you'll see I've got don't prematurely challenge things. Now, when I started out mob programming and I was in the typist role, so I was behind the keyboard, when the rest of the mob was asking me what to do, I would often question it and kind of question the solution and the approach. And the net result of that was I found we had lots of debates and discussions without really seeing any progress. And then somebody suggested I change my approach. Instead of challenging things prematurely, I first allow the code to be written and then have a discussion after that. And I found in changing that approach, first of all, the mob made a lot more improvements, so we started to see a lot more flow and momentum. And secondly, we didn't have as many of these up in the air debates on is this approach better than that one, when really did it make a difference? And I think like looking back, it came down to one of two things. Either I was actually going for the same approach that the rest of the group was going for. I just hadn't understood it because we were using different words. And so when we put it out in code, like we could go, oh, okay, when you said this, you actually meant this, and get a mapping out. Or, and often the case, the rest of the mob had a valid approach, and I just hadn't seen it. And in expressing, I go, okay, yeah, got that, that's perfect, let's go in that direction. So either way, I find like, when you're in the typist role, getting down to code is really, really important. You don't want to be having too long a discussion before you actually write something. The third point, where I say work with an incomplete understanding, you'll see that I've underlined for short periods of time. It's really important. So you've got to get this balance right where you trust the mob enough to be able to go where they want you to go without knowing the exact solution. But also, once you've got to the point where there's code on the screen, you want to understand what that code is doing, because you're going to rotate out of the typist into the mob soon, and then to add value, you've got to actually understand what's going on. So getting that balance right between not challenging and writing code, and then really asking, is this the best approach, can be tricky. As part of the rest of the mob, I think it boils down to three things as well. First, you need to help the group discover what the next logical step is. Now you may see lots of different angles and lots of different approaches and different things that need to be done, but it's part of your responsibility amongst all those things to identify what is the next logical step, what thing gets us closer to solving our problem, and then help the rest of the mob get to that point so you can get direction. Another thing is talking at appropriate levels of abstraction. And this can prove a real challenge. Like, different people have different levels of experience, and it can be hard to express ourselves in a way that everybody's understanding us. So if I am part of the rest of the mob and I'm wanting the typist to extract a method, and we've been working well together for a while, I might just say, extract that method into a class. And they get it and they're able to do that. But there may be times where you get like a blank stare and people aren't just getting it, and then you want to move that level of abstraction down to a more granular level. So you might say like highlight from line 45 to 60, right click, select extract method. So talking at appropriate levels can be a challenge, and while it's most apparent when you're dealing with the typist, you've also got to be aware that there are other people in the group and being aware of what levels they can understand. For instance, sometimes it's appropriate to have people that don't code on a full-time basis in the mob. They can be really, really effective, but if you're talking at a level that they don't get, you're not going to get value from their presence. So understanding what level is an appropriate level of abstraction is important. And then finally, you should always try to increase the level of understanding amongst the mob. So what we want to do in mob programming is create a safe environment where people are comfortable saying, I don't know, and where they're comfortable learning from each other. So if you think that somebody in the mob is not following, you want to make it safe for them to be able to learn. So you want to get them to a point where you can help increase their understanding. And likewise, if you don't understand what's going on, like, you need to have enough courage to say, look, like, I don't get this, please can you explain it to me? And in either direction, like our role is that we should be encouraging understanding. So those are really the three things that the rest of the mob has. Now, I've got a quote here from Woody Zill. Woody was at Yao. I see some of you guys were at Yao. Did any of you sit in Woody's talk? So Woody has a really great saying, and I kind of think of Woody as the father of mob programming. He's really done the most of it and gone around the world evangelizing it the most. And he says when you deal with people, there's a good protocol to use. And if you treat people with kindness, consideration, and respect, like, mobbing just becomes a lot easier. And while all three of those attributes are valuable, like, I want to spend a bit of time talking about what it means to treat people with consideration. Treating people with consideration means listening to what they have to say and really trying to understand where they're coming from. Now, this is a challenge. As developers, like, so often we see the solution and where we want to go with things. Consideration means putting yourself in their place and just thinking of where they're coming from and listening to it. I find that if you use this protocol that Woody says, a lot of the challenges that teams face when they start mob programming they fall away because everybody is actively listening to each other and actively being mindful of where other people in the mob are coming from. There's another quote I want to share, and it's from Llewellyn Falco, and yes, Llewellyn Falco's hair is actually this color. Like, he changes it once a month. Llewellyn Falco was one of the early proponents of mob programming. Him and Woody worked together in the US in coaching roles for a while. And Llewellyn has this saying where he says, for an idea to go into someone's head, from someone's head into the computer, it must first go through somebody else's hands. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a moment, but that's really the mantra of mob programming. The person in front of the keyboard is not the person solving the problem. It's the group. Like, we're trying to get to a collaborative group solve. So this is a short animation showing you kind of like at a very basic level how a typical mobbing session would work. Firstly, you'll see that we have a timer at the front there. Normally, mob programming sessions, you will time box the typist's time. And in my particular mob, we work at 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, we'll rotate the keyboard. And the next person in the group grabs the keyboard, becomes the typist. And so you're swapping into that role and you're stepping out into the rest of the mob. And as we go, that keyboard kind of goes across the entire group. And then when it comes back to you, you're the typist. Now, how does that look in real life? Well, this is a time-lapse video I did about a year and a half ago in my previous team. And this is how we work in an average day. Now, you'll see I've highlighted in red where the keyboard is. And as we progress, what you don't see is we have a big 60-inch screen in front of us with a little monitor on the right-hand side with a timer counting down in 10-minute intervals. And as it reaches 0, we do a commit, and we rotate the keyboard. We're quite strict on that. You'll notice also, like here, we just had somebody from another team pop by. And one of the things I've noticed with mob programming, as soon as you make code visible to everybody, you start getting people that are interested in what you're doing, and they notice something, oh, are you aware of this? And in this instance, I actually remember this day when the guy came to us. He's like, oh, what are you working on? Oh, you're working on that. Are you aware that this is a problem? And he shared something that we just would have taken us a while to discover. So that almost organic knowledge becomes really, really useful. You'll also notice that we have people leaving and joining the mob, but the mob just keeps working. Like, regardless of who's there, it just keeps going. And in this group, we have a range of skills. We've got people in this group with 15 years experience, and we've got people with 6 months experience, and they're all able to contribute. And for me, this is like one of the big value adds with mob programming, is that you can get people up and running and adding value to your team from day one, because they don't need to understand everything. They just need to understand enough for you to move forward. Now, something we've realized with mob programming, when I've done it, is typically we'll take lunch at the same time, because it just makes it easier when we come back together later. And after lunch, we'll kind of get together and people start trickling back into the mob and we'll carry on working. You'll notice that the keyboard is still moving around. Another thing that's really useful for us is you'll see that we have a whiteboard and people are busy making notes on the whiteboard as we work. What we're doing there is we're identifying other things that we still need to do, and we're just using a whiteboard as like a placeholder to say, okay, don't forget, we're going to come back to this, we're going to do this, we're parking ideas. And at the end of the day, we'll go through those things to make sure that we've covered everything. And that's what our average day looks like. That's pretty much how we worked in this team for well over a year. And one of the most intense ways of working that I've ever worked. But also one of the most enjoyable. I learned so much from these people in terms of refactoring, in terms of keyboard shortcuts, just in terms of how do you approach code. So some amazing things there. So that's enough about like a time lapse and how we do it. There are two patterns that I've found that the normal mobbing kind of template doesn't work well in. And the first is when you only have one person in the mob that knows what's going on, and everybody else is kind of, it's new to them. And in that situation, we found that identifying that we have an expert in the group, what we don't want to do is give that person the keyboard, because the second they get the keyboard, like they start going a lot faster than anybody else can follow, and then everybody becomes disengaged. So when we identify an expert in the mob, we'll keep them as part of the mob, and they'll focus at widening the understanding, really getting the rest of the group to understand what's going on. And we try get them to avoid getting behind the keyboard. Now, that can be frustrating because sometimes you want to, like let me just show you instead of explaining. I think it's a really good thing to develop the skill of being able to explain things to people without having to show them. Like, if you can keep working on that, that puts you in a really, really, really good place to have useful conversations. And so that's an approach we use when there's only one person in the mob that knows what's going on. There's another scenario when nobody in the mob has a clue what's going on. And usually like one of two situations causes either like the code is complex and the people that worked on it have already quit and like moved on to another company and you're stuck with this mess and you have no clue what's going on. Has anybody experienced that before? Like I'm seeing a couple heads nodding. Yes, this is a universal problem. Doesn't matter where in the world you go, you'll encounter that. Or there might be some sort of like foundational knowledge, so like a framework or a tool or an API that you just don't understand as well, but nobody has that experience. So it depends on what scenario that you have, on what we do as a mob to approach it. Like if there's a lot of complexity, we've actually found that working as a group to like unravel that complexity is really effective. And the technique we use is we call it throwaway refactoring. What we'll do is we'll do a temporary commit before we start refactoring, and then we'll set like a time box interval. We'll say, we have no clue what's going on in the code, so we're going to commit, and we're going to dedicate the next 10 or 20 minutes just trying to figure out what's going. And then we'll really aggressively refactor the code. We won't worry about safe refactorings. We'll just get in there like a bull in the china shop, trying to like identify groups of knowledge and like what happens if we pull this out, what happens there. And then at the end of that time box period, we'll have a conversation as a group, like what have we learned from this? Like if we reapproach this, where would we start? Like how would we tackle this? And then we just do a reset on the code. So we throw away everything we've done and we start again, but we're very intentional about the refactorings. So we'll make sure that we're leveraging our refactoring tool, try and make things safe. We found that that works really, really well to uncover complexity. We might even have a pause and go to the whiteboard and just try and diagram things out to make sure we're understanding what the code is telling us to do. Well, that works great if there's complexity in the code. What happens if you have a scenario where you're missing some sort of foundational knowledge? Now, our experience is that reading help manuals together as a group isn't necessarily the best way of learning. Like different people learn differently. Some people like to go and do a tutorial online, other people want to read a blog post, other people want to read a help manual, things like that. So we want to like allow people to do that. So what we do then is we do a time box separation. We'll say, we feel we need about half an hour or an hour, whatever period of time we feel is reasonable to try and figure out these tools or what we're trying to solve. And then we'll all go out on our own and we'll work independently of each other trying to figure things out. The rule we have is if somebody figures it out first, they let everybody else know and we get to be together as a mob and that person shows what they've figured out and how they approach it and we carry on working. If, however, like we worked for that full time interval and we still haven't figured out what's going on, we still get together as a mob and we share what we've learned. And often we find that just in sharing those things, collectively we have enough pieces together to then figure out where we need to go. But we can always make a call. Like maybe we'll say, well, we still don't know enough, let's separate again. and then we just time box it and we get together. So we use that technique. And if I look at it from like a pattern base, what we're doing is we're trying to default to collaboration. So we want to try and approach things as groups, but we're not going to hold ourselves to that. So if we think that this problem actually feels better working on our own, like we'll do that, but then as soon as we get back to the point of our normal work, we'll go back to collaboration. So that's kind of the mantra that our team takes as default to collaboration. So I've gone through the mechanics, I've spoken a bit about the roles in mob programming. So I work at MYOB, and MYOB does accounting and payroll software, and that means we have a lot of accountants in our office space. And we get this question all the time, like, is this a cost-effective way of working? In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, our team was mobbing, and one of the accountants walked past and was like, guys, like, I just want to know, like, to me this looks like what you've done is you've taken 3 people and made them solve one person's problem. So in effect, you've just inflated the cost by 3 times. Like, do you really think that this is a cost-effective way of working? And I think that that's something worth exploring. So instead of saying, is this cost-effective, I want to change it to go, well, are we being productive working this way? And it turns out measuring developer productivity is really, really hard. I remember having an experience where a former colleague of mine told me that he was working on a project. The project was running way, way behind schedule, and he happened to share a desk. The project manager happened to sit next to him. And what happens when you fall behind in a project? Well, you have more and more status update meetings. So they're just having more and more of these status update meetings. And straight after one of the status update meetings, he was sitting there busy working, and the project manager looked at him and said, can you not just type faster? And in his mind, like, he had equated productivity with the speed that we type. Now, we know that how fast you type isn't a good measure of how productive you are as a developer. Like, fundamentally, what we're doing is not typing. Like, there's something else going on. Well, is developer productivity measured by number of hours worked? Like, is that a good measure? Like, are you being productive just by the time you spend? I think you can be at work working and not necessarily be productive. So measuring hours is also, for me, not a great measure. Well, what about number of lines of code written? That would be an awesome way to measure productivity, because I could just write a tool to write lines of code, and then I get a great bonus at the end of the year. Lines of code written is also not a great way of measuring developer productivity. Neither is how busy you are. What about time to market? Like, can we measure whether we're productive if we're able to get things to market quicker? Well, maybe. I mean, that could be an indication. But if you want to get something to market really quickly, well, what do? You just do some shortcuts. So that could have an impact on you. So even time to market isn't a good measure. Well, maybe the overall financial return on the project. Like, if we measure the overall financial return on the project, that will tell us whether our developers are being productive. The challenge with that is, like, financial return on a project is not just determined by the product being produced. You could have a great product being produced in a really lousy sales and marketing team, and then is that a fair measure on the developer productivity? I think that you could look at this from so many angles, and the net result is measuring developer productivity is extremely hard, especially without context. And so another quote from Peter Block that he says, transformation comes more from pursuing profound questions than seeking practical answers. And the other, at Yale last year, I was speaking to Woody about developer productivity, and he said, what if you change the question around? Instead of saying, how do we measure developer productivity, what if we ask the question, what makes us unproductive as developers? So I have a room full of developers here. Does anybody have a pet peeve or something that makes them unproductive?
It's new tasks coming in all the time.
New tasks?
Yeah.
How is that? So new work.
Context switching.
Context switching. So that is one that comes up all the time. Anything else?
Overthinking a problem.
Overthinking a problem. So we just